Hello everyone, it's 1 o'clock here on the East Coast of the U.S., so let's get started. Thank you for participating in the State of Deployment's Grid Week webinar. This is the third in a series of events that are aimed at providing a clear picture of the status and future of the smart grid. My name is Nick Manley and I'm with Clasma Events, your host for today's webinar. Our goal here today is to have a lively and interactive discussion around the status of smart grid deployments. We will hear brief presentations by each of our panelists, and that will be followed by a Q&A session, so be sure to post your questions using the questions function of your webinar control panel. You can also tweet your questions using the GridWeek hashtag. Our moderator for today's event is Anto Budiarjo, President and CEO of Clasma Events. So without further ado, Anto.
Thank you, Nick. Good afternoon, everyone. We're here in Washington, D.C., and glad to have you on this webinar. If you can get to the next slide, Nick, please. So just want to explain a little bit about the background of Grid Week and also the background of why we thought this series of webinars actually has been very sort of useful in the development of Grid Week agenda. We've been organizing Grid Week since 2007, and the key mission of Grid Week has always been to bring together the broad range of stakeholders involved in smart grid in a collaborative sort of way to sort of move things forward in smart grid. And so we've been working since the beginning of this year with advisory board made up of key leaders related to smart grid, and Chris Hickman will actually talk a little bit more about that. And in the process of doing this in the past few months, it's been a very collaborative process, and we thought that it would be a useful exercise and useful effort to actually extend this collaboration to the broader smart grid community
Welcome to GoToWebinar.
Not specifically involved with Grid Week planning itself. So we thought the best way to do this is to put together a series of webinars to involve the individuals who've been putting together the agenda for Grid Week. So this is the third webinar, and the three webinars have been generally focused around the three themes of Grid Week this year. And the general theme of Grid Week is actually the way forward, because we think that the issue right now is how do we actually move forward with the deployment of smart grid and the evolution of smart grid. And so that's broken down into three sub-themes. The first theme, which is the theme of Tuesday of Grid Week, is looking forward, where we want to have a discussion on what the picture is going to look like in, let's say, in 10 to 15 years' time of energy consumption. Then on the Wednesday of Grid Week, we talk about strategic solution. In other words, talking about the technologies and the issues and the challenges of implementing smart grid to that vision that we would have discussed on Tuesday. And then finally on Thursday, we want to
Anto, we are not hearing you, or I am not.
I'm not hearing Anto.
Yeah, I think we just lost Anto for a minute. Give us just a second to sort this out.
Thank you.
So am I back online now?
Yes.
Yes, you are.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. I don't know what happened to the audio. So the third day of Grid Week is state of deployment, and here we're talking about the the deployment, the case studies of actually implementation of smart grid, and that's the focus of today's webinar. So I do want to hand it over to Chris Hickman to talk about a little bit more from the industry perspective as to put the background of what's actually happening in smart grid and put it in context of what we're doing with Grid Week. Chris.
Good afternoon, everyone, and on behalf of the advisory board for Grid Week, welcome today. Just real briefly, I'd like to reemphasize some of what Anto had said from the board's perspective. The advisory board is made up of partner organizations, the Department of Energy, the Department of Commerce, NIST, NEMA, EEI, NRECA, APPA, UTC, EPRI, the Galvin Initiative, NESCO, the Environmental Defense Fund, the U.S. TDA, NARUC, and a host of other partner organizations from media to industry, people like Smart Grid Today, Public Utilities Fortnightly, and a host of people that provide us invaluable input. But over the course of the last 2 years that I've had the privilege of being on the advisory board, we've sought to extend that collaboration, and through the first 2 webinars and hopefully today, throughout the course of the entire webinar, if you have any thoughts on the agenda, any thoughts on the content, any thoughts on anything that you would like to see at Grid Week, the purpose of these webinars is to answer any questions that you might have, as well as to extend the collaboration out and get your feedback and input on the agenda that we're putting forward to make this collaborative effort what it could and should be. This broad group of stakeholders that we bring together throughout this collaborative process to create this agenda each year is a dramatic amount of effort, and it is a true indication of, I guess, the perseverance and just absolute straightforward effort that all of these organizations and all of us in industry are trying to bring all of the country back together in a way that helps push all of the smart grid initiatives forward in a collaborative fashion. So if we can, we'll just continue to push this agenda of modernizing our electric grid and get your input and bring this back. Anto?
Thank you. Thanks, Chris. So the focus of Thursday of Grid Week and the focus of this webinar is this state of deployment. And a lot of this came up with our discussions with EPRI, one of the major partners. And I'd like to introduce Matt Wakefield from EPRI to talk a little bit about the vision behind this this notion of bringing the state of deployment discussion at Grid Week, and also then talk specifically about the transmission distribution area, which is the specific area that he is actually focused on this state of deployment story. So Matt, hand it over to you.
Thank you, Anto, and welcome everybody to the call. Yeah, the vision here really is there's just a huge amount of investment going on in not only the United States, around the world, in smart grid efforts, and it's really an unprecedented opportunity to work together to share lessons learned. In many cases, utilities are not competing, and we have a unique opportunity to share and collaborate, and that's really the theme of Grid Week here. So we have 3 tracks on the state of deployment. The one track that I'm going to talk about is on transmission and distribution area. And so smart grid projects focused on transmission and distribution. If we look forward on some of the research that we've done on estimating the costs and benefits, a majority of the investments for a smart grid are going to occur in transmission and distribution. And so on the transmission side, we're going to talk about situational awareness. There's a lot of activities, ISOs deploying and wholesalers deploying PMUs. How do we take that situational awareness data and bring it into actionable information? And what is going on in the industry to do that? On the distribution side of things, huge emphasis on system integration, where we have all these systems that can potentially integrate with one another for advanced applications. A lot of standards activities going on in that area, and taking advantage of the lowering costs of communications and intelligence, while also keeping in mind utilities have investments in legacy systems that they can't just abandon. And another big area on the distribution side is conservation, voltage reduction, and volt-var optimization. A number of activities in this area are showing measurable savings and benefit So a session will discuss approaches. How is it being used for efficiency? How is it being used for demand response? How is measurement and verification being done? Are they getting rate recovery from those efforts? And is that sustainable as load models change in the future? Will those benefits still be there moving forward? So overall, it's very important, now getting to the bullet points on the slide, that we take advantage of this opportunity and really do good science. That's some of the things that EPRI is working with, among other organizations, to make sure there is good science being done. And so we answered the technology question, does it work? And then the benefits question, which is separate from that, is it worth doing? What are the benefits? And then, because many of these are demonstration-based projects and not necessarily full-scale deployment, extending the extrapolation of the benefits for full-scale deployment, because you may be doing your demonstration on a single feeder or substation, which may not be completely representative of your whole deployment territory. So looking at that. And also, it's important that we as an industry when we do these projects and we get the benefits and the research results and lessons learned, that those results are transferable from one utility to the next. It's very important. And again, I mentioned the collaboration, and it's really important where we have, I'd say, larger challenges require industry support, but it's really, that's where the biggest opportunities are as we pull together and take advantage. It's very important. Every utility has their own needs, but we can really work to minimize repetitive research, sharing lessons learned, and as we go through this process, identify what are the top priority barriers that the next set of demonstrations or projects should address as we knock down these barriers and move forward. And I will stop there. Anto, back to you.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you. And so that's a great overview of the transmission and distribution side. So I'm going to hand it over next to Bob Saint from NRECA. Bob will talk about his area of state of deployment, which is what we call cross-cutting, because they're kind of a couple of different subjects, more than two different subjects that relate to a number of sort of areas in the grid. So, Bob, hand it over to you.
Thank you, Anto, and welcome all to this webinar, and welcome to this discussion on the cross-cutting issues with regard to the Smart Grid, this Grid Week conference. And these are called cross-cutting issues because they do actually cross over many domains, several of the domains within the Smart Grid. And the first one we're concentrating or focusing on is the integration of renewables and distributed energy resources storage into the grid. And you know, I've personally been working on integration of distributed generation for over 10 years, and really haven't seen a tremendous amount of activity until the last 2 or 3 years. And boy, has it increased, especially in the area of distribution. So one of the things that we're looking at is the integration of renewables, which generally are intermittent sources, not as stable as the more traditional sources of power. So there are some issues that have been raised, and also some solutions to these issues. So we are involving the trade organizations that deal with these issues, the American Wind Interest Group, the Utility Wind Interest Group, and a new organization for us anyway, the Solar Group, SEPA. And because we are seeing quite a bit of solar actual implementation, so we'll have folks from these groups on the panel, plus some utilities that have been implementing a significant amount of renewables in especially their distribution and transmission systems. And then the other track, the other session very different. It's looking at how we're doing with regard to smart grid implementation, and it features the Smart Grid Maturity Model, SGMM, which is currently a DOE project, funded project, originally started by IBM, and now being continued by Carnegie Mellon. And several utilities have implemented the Smart Grid Maturity Model, and so we'll feature some of those. And international utilities, I think we've got somebody from Mexico lined up to talk about how they have used the Smart Grid Maturity Model in their planning for the smart grid implementation. And this maturity model kind of indicates how mature, how you are doing with regard to smart grid implementation compared with everybody else. And we all like to compare ourselves with other utilities in our area in the nation. And this tool really helps to do that, and we'll go into that tool. And so these are the two areas that the cross-cutting issues track will be addressing. Anto?
Yes, thank you, Bob. So the third area that we intend to cover in this on Thursday of Grid Week is the consumer side issues, and for this, Joe Palladino from DOE is leading this sort of area of discussion, and Joe is with us here today. So Joe, can I hand it over to you to give a brief overview of what we're going to be covering here?
Yes, Anto, thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here. Anto, quick check. Am I supposed to press *1, or can everybody hear me right now?
No. Everybody can hear you. Just continue. It's fine.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Well, it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you all for being here. I'm involved with the Recovery Act programs, the smart grid programs in the Department of Energy. I am really responsible for trying to determine really what the impact of these projects are and be able to convey what's actually been deployed and how effective it is. We've worked a lot with EPRI, Matt Wakefield, to actually develop an approach for determining what the benefits are of these projects. And we're hoping to apply that methodology to determine, to get really good empirical evidence as to what the true value of these projects are. Just very, very briefly on where we are with the Recovery Act projects. There are 99 smart grid investment grant projects. There are 32 smart grid demonstration projects. Of the 99 smart grid investment grant projects, 30 projects are focused on deploying advanced metering infrastructure technology. 39 of the projects are cross-cutting projects, and they're doing both, typically both AMI as well as distribution and automation. The 32 smart grid demonstration projects are doing both energy storage projects and smart grid demonstration projects. 16 will be doing smart grid demonstration projects. There are many, many configurations that are being deployed. We have variations with respect to the types of communications infrastructure that are being deployed. There are different kinds of devices that are being deployed within customers' premises. For instance, the recipients are deploying in-home displays. They're deploying web portals. They're deploying programmable thermostats. In some cases, they've got appliances that are actually also communicating with those control devices. So we have a variety of technologies that are being deployed. In addition to that, we have many of the recipients that are going to apply different sorts of rate tariffs. And beyond that, we also have projects that are deploying electric vehicles, charging stations. There's not much distributed energy resources that are plugged into these systems, but of course, the future grid is going to have to, deal with really maintaining balance between load and generation, and being able to interface effectively with distributed energy resources, electric vehicles, having a capability to microgrid, et cetera. So there is a session, the first session called Leveraging AMI, which is going to try to show some of these various configurations. We're seeing we're starting to see some results with respect to improved outage management where AMI is being deployed, and there's actually reduced truck rolls and improved response to outages, and we're actually seeing some results there. Again, as I mentioned, we also want to talk about how customers are now being involved with more demand-side management with the application of tariffs and the applications of these kinds of technologies that are available to them. And of course, we're going to want to be able to measure how much peak load or overall demand reduction there is, and be able to determine what the resulting benefit of that is. And then we also have a utility in our group, and Matt, this merges with some of the stuff you're doing, that are applying AMI to be able to undertake conservation voltage reduction. So we have a set of projects that are going to tackle that and focus on those areas. We also have a consumer behavior session, which is going to it's going to permit host several of the recipients that are undertaking rigorous consumer behavior studies with the Department of Energy. A subset of the Smart Grid Investment Grant recipients, 8 of them actually, but they're actually doing 10 separate studies, are actually undertaking highly rigorous consumer behavior studies. And these are rigorous to the extent where there are control groups and treatment groups, and there's randomization of the treatment groups. And I think we've got statisticians and economists that are designing these pilot studies, but they're being designed jointly, obviously, with the recipient taking the lead and the recipient making sure that either the Public Utility Commission or the City Council or whoever are the other decision makers in this process are being collaborated with in a very close way. So just to make sure that the studies are that everybody feels that the studies are fair, but we're able to get really good information out of them. And there are some very specific questions that we want to address in these studies. First, we want to get a handle on enrollment and attrition. How many people are actually going to enroll in these studies? What's the effect of opt-in versus opt-out, for instance? What is the effect of consumer education? In addition, what is the effect of pricing on consumer response to electricity rates? There have been lots of studies, lots of very good studies done to date, about 80 or so. We want to get a really good handle on that. And in addition to that, we want to determine what the incremental effect is of information technologies like an in-home display or a web portal, and control technologies like a programmable controllable thermostat on the level of response. And so we're going to have 4 of our recipients speak to the scope of what they're trying to do and how and what their lessons learned are to date. And that's what we're going to be focusing on. Thank you, Anto.
Thank you. Thanks, Joe. Just want to remind everybody to, this is a pretty unique opportunity to have this panel to talk about deployment experiences. I think a lot of us have been sort of monitoring the fact that there's a lot of deployment, a lot of money being spent in smart grids. So please do ask some questions through the GoToWebinar control panel. and we'll discuss them. And there could be questions, specific questions on how we want to, how we plan to approach this discussion, and also sort of more general question about deployment in general, and or specific questions about Grid Week. So, but I want to start with a question to get things going. To all three panelists, are we going to hear anything new, or how much new stuff do we think we're going to hear in this in these discussions at Grid Week? So, I don't know. Maybe I'll start with Matt. You want to sort of respond to that? What's the expectations?
Yeah, I'll. In the transmission and distribution area, I think a couple of areas where people that aren't deeply involved might be seeing some things new. On the transmission side, the PMUs are being deployed. There's a huge effort by the DOE and the stimulus projects in that area. So the situational awareness and what actionable information, that's really where we're evolving to. So what is that actionable information? How will that impact things moving forward? So that's one example on the transmission. And on the distribution side, really the opportunity of integrating existing systems together or emerging new systems is creating a lot more opportunities than we've envisioned in the past, and it's being driven primarily by the as we're approaching. This is take this next statement with a grain of salt, but approaching virtually unlimited access to every utility asset. Now, we're not there, but that's kind of the long-term vision, and it's conceivable. We have the technology to do it, and as the costs are being lowered for communication and intelligence, utilities are reaching out to those devices that historically they have not had access to. So the management of that. And then lastly, the conservation, voltage reduction, volt bar optimization, seeing some really, really positive results and a lot of activity in that area. So that's really an exciting area to see some real tangible results, what utilities are seeing, and their expectations moving forward, and the associated investment to get those benefits.
So, Joe, do you want to?
Yeah, sure. Let me add to that. That's excellent, Matt. One thing that I want to mention is there is one utility that I won't mention now, but that will be speaking at the conference that is seeing right now, and this is they've proven this statistically. They're seeing a 1% energy efficiency improvement for every 1% voltage decrease when they're applying their conservation voltage reduction technique. And it turns into a huge amount of savings societally. And I know a lot of that is a pass-through for the utility, but there's an incredible amount of benefit that comes out of that, number one. Number two, I want to mention that we're starting to post things on smartgrid.gov that is really where we're trying to show what the result is. It's trying to give a status of where we are with the project, the Recovery Act project, as well as try to report on whatever impacts we're seeing. So, for instance, there are some case studies. We're trying to develop case studies and actually talk to recipients specifically. So there's one case study on there now, which is talks about what the Western Electricity Coordinating Council is doing with respect to PMU deployments, and you should be able to look at that case study, and they're expecting a lot of benefit from the deployment of phaser measurement units, and it also talks about different applications they're trying to see. In addition, we're going to be coming up with another case study within the next couple of weeks. It might even be on the website another week on the dialogue we're having with the with the North American Synchrophaser Initiative Project. And again, NASP, and they've got a website, is the group that comes together that consists of all of the folks throughout the country that are deploying synchrophaser technologies, and they are talking about what their status are, what their lessons learned are, what kind of benefits they're seeing, how they want to apply the technology. And DOE is working actively with NASP to move that dialogue forward and be able to determine what the impact and benefit of the technology is. There's a great report, the RAPIR report, which actually gives what the status is right now, the synchrophaser technology, and how the Recovery Act recipients are trying to apply the technology. So that's just a couple of comments.
Hey, Matt, there was one quick question from David O'Brien around CVR, sorry, constant the voltage regulation and what's going on out there. You know, you got to come to Grid Week to hear the whole answer, but, you know, what can you give us an overview of kind of what you're going to be talking about there?
Sure. So, and Joe touched on it a little bit. In the conservation voltage reduction factor is the number that he referred to, which is in some places you can see, for example, every 1% voltage reduction, you see a 1% kilowatt-hour savings. So let's take that concept, and that it's very complicated because if you reduce voltage, for example, on an incandescent light bulb, the light gets dimmer and you save energy, of course. If you apply that to electric heaters, well, it'll use less energy in the short term, but it's going to end up running longer. So your kilowatt hours may be the same, but you do get a peak demand benefit associated with that. And it gets more and more complicated depending on the types of loads, whether it's a solid-state load or a motor and so on. So what we're going to hear on in that particular session is several examples of utilities, how they're deploying it, what sensors are needed to do this, a number of different approaches in how they're using it, whether it's for just voltage optimization and a power quality improvement, or peak reduction, or overall efficiency improvements. What are the approaches? What are they seeing? What are the investments? And we have a combination. We have Consolidated Edison, which has a network-based infrastructure, versus what you might see in other areas, which is a radial. And so we'll have a combination of presentations showing their approaches, and it's a little uniqueness based on the utility's own distribution grid architecture. And so we'll be talking about what are the problems that they're addressing, what are they assuming the savings to be. Some of the biggest challenges that we're trying to figure out as an industry is how do you do the measurement and verification such that you can reliably get rate recovery for that, because in essence you're reducing your revenue, but there's a benefit overall, and that needs to be measured. But in some cases it may not be, it could be cost prohibitive to use the same level of measurement and verification that you do to prove the science versus full-scale deployment. I'll stop my rambling there.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Nick, if you can put up the question from Max Parnes, and his question is really about the fact that much of the discussion is really about residential focused, residential consumers. Will there be anything in the state of deployment discussions about commercial applications, commercial and presumably commercial and industrial consumers? Does somebody want to take that question?
I can take that question. This is Bob Saint, and with regard to implementation of renewables, we are seeing commercial and industrial applications of solar and some small wind generators on warehouse buildings and in industrial settings, and that will be addressed in the session on implementation of renewables and distributed energy resources.
You want to, Chris, I know you.
Yeah, there's another couple of questions, but on the commercial and industrial side, there's a tremendous amount going on in terms of how it's being applied in industry and the dynamic nature of the things that can occur there. There's going to be a lot of incremental conversations. You'll see in these presentations that they're very holistic because these are very broad sweeping projects, and the people that will be there to present them may highlight 3 or 4 things, but grab them after the presentations or other places and you'll hear about all the other things that they're doing, because I know that many of the projects and people that will be presenting them do have CNI applications that they've deployed. One of the other questions that came in for the panel is this only about ARA projects, or are there going to be other things out there that we're talking about?
So, Matt, you want to pick up on that one?
Sure. So in my role at EPRI, I manage EPRI Smart Grid Demonstration Initiative, which there is a fair amount of those utilities that are ARRA recipients, but not all of them. And it's an international collaborative as well, so there's participation from around the world. So we're going to see perspectives from a wide range of utility deployments, doing smart grid deployments. I think probably looking at the panelists, just because there is so much activity in the ARRA stimulus funding, most of them will likely be from that area, but some of the applications, there'll be a little bit of variety in there. So there's a mix.
Joe, do you want to have anything to add to that?
I would say for the Recovery Act projects, I'd say most of them are commercial and residential. There is not a lot of looking at what the response of the industrial sector would be to prices and other things like that.
Thank you. Thanks, Joe. There's another question that's come in from Srinath Eswarahali. I hope I got that right. This is a really important question about security, cybersecurity, and about how that's being considered in these deployments. Will there be sufficient discussions and considerations or questions asked about this in all of the discussions about the deployment experiences? Do you want to start on that, Bob, because that may fit into the CMM kind of picture?
Yeah,
I can speak to that from a DOE perspective, so specifically with respect to the Recovery Act projects.
Go ahead. Can you make sure you speak up,
Joe? I'm not sure how much is going to be addressed at Grid Week, but every project that is being deployed has to have had to submit a cybersecurity plan and address some very, very specific questions. And they're not allowed really to proceed forward without actually showing us and demonstrating they've got a very strong cybersecurity plan in place. Secondly, we're actually having a workshop just with the recipients to focus in August, actually a couple of weeks from now, to focus specifically on any cybersecurity issues or practices that should really be addressed and implemented in these projects. So we've had a very diligent stand on trying to make sure that we're addressing cybersecurity in all of the projects.
And yes, this is Bob.
Bob or Matthew?
Yeah, this is Bob, and we are, the Smart Grid Maturity Model definitely does address security, and what the model is a series of questions that is asked of the utility management team and an operational team to find out how they're doing and how mature they are with regard to smart grid. And certainly how mature you are with regard to security is an important aspect of this whole area. So definitely the smart grid maturity model addresses security and can raise questions about how secure are you and how current are you with the security implementations of the security systems with the smart grid technology implementation.
Bob, I'd like to add to what you've just said. NRECA, and I know you know this, Bob, I just wanted to mention this in case you had forgotten to. NRECA just developed a set of cyber guidelines, which is fairly rigorous approach to how you would institutionally and practically implement cybersecurity practices in a smart grid project. The cyber guidelines really were an attempt to make the, and I don't know what this acronym stands for. There's a document that NIST came out called the NISTIR, N-I-S-T-I-R report. It's many pages thick, and it goes through the set of practices that one should really pay attention to implement cybersecurity practices. What NRECA did was take a hard look at this document and say, okay, I want to develop a digestible and easy to follow approach to implementing what's in that document. And so right now there is a document which is available from NRECA. I think it's freeware. I'm not sure. It is the set of guidelines that all of the projects that they're overseeing, Recovery Act projects they're overseeing, are implementing. It is a set of guidelines to institute cybersecurity practices. I don't have the name of that. Again, if you go to the smartgrid.gov website and you go to the case study that we've got there on what NRECA is doing, that document is referenced there.
Yes, thank you, Joe, for
maybe Bob can.
Yeah, thank you, Joe, for mentioning that. Yes, we have developed this this guideline based on the NIST IR and have made it available to everybody. In addition to the guideline, we also have a template that you can use, each utility can use, to create their own individual cybersecurity plan. And again, we've made that template available to everybody. And it is available through the smartgrid.gov site, and that'd probably be the easiest place to get it. But we want to make that available to everybody, so everybody can have their own smart grid implementation or security plan and know where they stand with regard to security.
Thank you, Bob. Let's move on to another question. I think Chris is going to.
Charlotte Legates has asked a question specifically around consumers and the consumer experience. Seeing lots of studies released, one recent one by Utility and DOE about the performance of a project, but not necessarily how the consumer interaction kind of went off. Were people happy? How did they make it work? And I think that we're going to have an entire day on this at Grid Week. We have a consumer symposium on Monday that Judith will lead, and this forum is going to delve into a whole bunch of those types of issues with a broad set of stakeholders. And this was recently done at Connectivity Week and will be done in a little bit more detail at Grid Week on Monday. And so there's a lot of that going on, and there's information on the Connectivity website about all the different kind of studies that you can find regarding the experiences, not just the technical performance.
Thank you. That if we can get back to the deployment story. So, Nick, if you can put up the question from Zachary Coleman, which is really a great question here about the progress of smart grid technology. Do the panelists feel that it's been slower than expected, or is it where it should be, and where do we think it is, and compared to expectations maybe from a couple of years back? I think that's how I read this question. So, Matt, you want to pick that one up first?
Yeah, I'll take that in a couple perspectives. I think this is a good example of jumping into, gee, there's a lot of hype about smart grid. Where are the benefits associated with it? And so I think as an industry, if you look at consumer behavior and demand response, we have a fair, I mean, this is approaches have been in place literally for decades. Demand response is nothing new. But what is evolving is now we have more capabilities than we had in the past. We have the ability to get information for consumers to react to it manually if they choose to, and fairly consistently we're still seeing about the same amount of participation from consumers. That is, it's in the 5 to 10% range, relatively small amounts. Even when you have an opt-out program where 98% of the people stay in the program, they don't opt out, it's the 5 to 10% range that are really participating. So that's maybe from a hype perspective, there's just so much activity in the consumer side of things that it maybe hasn't built up to what some people had expected it to. And I think that drives to the evolution of the technology where I think the need for automating that as much as possible based on consumer preferences is one example. Where else? I mean, electric storage price decrease cannot happen fast enough. I mean, that's an area where we show a lot of promise, a lot of activity being driven by the electric vehicle manufacturers driving prices down. But that type of activity to get those prices down can't seem to happen fast enough. Those are just a couple examples. I'll pass it over to Joe and Bob and see if anybody else has any comments.
Yeah,
Matt, this is Joe. I would agree with you. What's really interesting is as I think the industry as well as consumers start to take a look at all the information that's now being provided to them from, and then you can see this in the conservation voltage reduction, voltage management optimization scheme. As that information starts to become available, utilities practices are really going to get modified a little bit, and they're really going to be able to tackle some things that they do now in a much more efficient way. I think, and I'm going to echo something that you were saying, Matt. I think it's from what I'm seeing. I'm not an expert here. But just from what I'm seeing, from what I'm hearing, from what I'm sensing, the distribution automation side of things is going to, may progress fairly quickly. Although there's a lot of evolution that has to go on there because of electric vehicles, et cetera. But I think the adoption of technology on the consumer space, the evolution of and application of dynamic pricing, I think that's going to move a lot slower. And the rate of movement and adoption of those practices is going to be undertaken on a case-by-case, city-by-city, utility-by-utility in that kind of manner. Because I think that the local community really needs to get comfortable with how consumers will be involved with decisions on energy management. They need to get comfortable there first before there's going to be a lot of movement in that arena. Those are my comments.
Yeah, I have some comments too, and we often talk about the implementation of smart grid technologies goes at the pace of value, and that pace is different for every utility, and also within utilities, the implementation of certain technologies may be different even within the utilities. So in some areas we've seen implementations faster than we expected, some we've seen slower than we expected. But it all depends on the business case that is made and the value received from that implementation. For example, in the area of AMI, we've seen co-ops, especially the more rural co-ops, implement automated meter reading infrastructure technologies at a very fast pace, and in fact, there are many co-ops that are fully deployed with AMI today, and seeing very significant cost savings in truck rollouts and improvements in distribution reliability, the improvements in outage restoration, for example, today. Now, in other areas, the pace is a little bit slower because the benefit and evaluating the cost benefit to the implementation is harder to do, and maybe not as straightforward as AMI is. But the pace, I think, is fairly fast, considering that we're looking out 10, 15, 20 years with the standards that we're doing and the pilot projects that are underway today.
Thanks, Bob. Chris, you want to?
Sure. I just would like to tack on to that I think that the reality is setting in for folks now. This is an evolution, not a revolution in terms of the deployment of these technologies. We have trillions of dollars of infrastructure, and that's not going to change overnight. And we also have 3,800 utilities in this country, and that's a little bit of information overload. We have utilities that have fully deployed smart grid, have fully tiered rates, have fully integrated with their outage management system and all these things, and you've never seen a story about them. And then we have utilities that are just doing their first project on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. This is very much a very broad and diverse industry, and it will be an evolution, not a revolution. But I do believe that when people think that it's going a little bit slower than they had anticipated, this is like seeing an episode of the Jetsons and looking at the art of the impossible, and then going somewhere and seeing that the Flintstone age can still exist in some places, and having to understand that there's something everywhere in between that, and people are moving through at the speed of value what they value to their utility and their consumers, what they should implement. And that's going to be a consistent story on a go-forward basis. This is not going to be consistent across our country or across any utility.
Thanks. So we probably have time for a couple more questions. So one that's coming from Ben Boyd is about EVs. Are we going to cover much by way of the update or uptake of electric vehicles in the grid and the effects of that? Matt, do you want to start on that?
That's an area that could be touched on the distribution session on management on the distribution, primarily from a power quality standpoint, on volt var optimization, on the impacts of that on the grid. That's not the primary purpose of that session, but it is a factor in the strategies and the approaches for the control of voltage on the distribution system. I don't know if other sessions are going to touch on that. Bob, are you touching on that in any of your sessions?
Well, actually not. And let's keep in mind that this day of Grid Week is concentrating on the deployments that are already in place. And we certainly haven't seen many electric vehicles deployed yet. So for the Thursday of Grid Week, we really aren't doing much with electric vehicles. However, other days, the future of electric vehicles is certainly on the horizon, and but we haven't seen many deployments yet.
So there is actually some.
We've asked someone to present at the Leveraging AMI session, but we haven't had a confirmation yet with respect to electric vehicles.
Yeah, that's. I was just going to mention that in the consumer side track that there's some discussion about including electric vehicles. I think it's obviously important. So another question really is about, and I think Bob mentioned a case study that's going to come from Mexico. Is there going to be anything else in any of these state of deployment stories about implementation outside of the U.S., or is it focused just on the U.S.?
I am currently trying to get some European representatives on the T&D track and closing plenary session. I don't have confirmation. Anto, maybe you can talk about the Indian representatives and their experience.
Yeah, we actually have a significant amount of involvement and discussion going on with India right now, and that will actually come in both in the Monday International Smart Grid Summit at Grid Week, at which we're going to get a delegation of maybe 2-3 dozen individuals from India, utility executives and government figures, as well as smart grid leaders. And we've also just heard, in fact, last week that the Minister of Power from India will be speaking at Grid Week on Thursday, the day where we're talking about states of deployment. I've had the opportunity to be in India recently several times, and they're obviously relatively at the starting point in terms of smart grid. They're just starting to figure out how to deploy. So I think they'll be coming not so much to tell stories of deployment there, although there are some success stories, but much more to learn about what's happening here, which is obviously a great thing.
So with that, I think we have captured all of your comments and suggestions. Thank you very much. There's a tremendous amount of feedback. We obviously did not get to all the questions. There was just simply too big of a volume, but I hope that was helpful in the sense of giving you kind of a layout for the day that we're going to do for deployments. And thank you all for the suggestions. There's some great ideas in here for what goes on. Do we have any closing comments from the panelists?
This is Matt. I just want to thank Anto and Chris for facilitating this, and appreciate the participants' response. One last thing I wanted to mention on, we were talking about where things may be going a little slower, and it's actually a result of the amount of information coming in. In some cases, we're advancing to have a really good quality information come in, but in some cases we don't have the back office infrastructure to do the analysis needed, or that can be done, to really explore what that data means. So that's one area, I think, an unintended consequence of not too much of a good thing, but there's a lot of good stuff coming in, and so that's another interesting thing to keep an eye on, is how we manage this data to get the real value out of it. But, thank you for participation.
And Bob Saint, closing comments?
Yes, thank you, Anto, and everybody for participating in this web conference. And there have been quite a few questions and comments come in, and we'll take those into consideration, because this, believe it or not, this still is an evolving a conference, and we may implement some of your suggestions. So thank you very much, and hope to see you at Grid Week.
And Joe, from a DOE perspective, closing comments and
well, thank you, Anto, and thanks everybody else. And I just echo what everybody else said.
Well, thank you, the panelists, and just to remind everybody, Grid Week is coming up in less than 6 weeks now, in September 12th to 15th in Washington, D.C. This is the process that we go through, and we probably will go through this all the way until September the 11th, or very close to that, to actually asking if we're dealing with the right issues, and making sure that Grid Week is a gathering of smart grid stakeholders to move the agenda forward. So thank you for your time this afternoon, and if you have any additional questions, email, tweet, or otherwise communicate to us. We'll be very happy to receive your input and suggestions for content. So thank you, and see you all in September.
Thank you.